Good morning, everybody, and could I welcome all members, officers, and members of the public, particularly members of the public who have committed their time to join in this process. You're very welcome, and thank you for your contribution. And I know we'll be having speakers on one of the items later on, so you may have to wait a little while for that. But we do have a number of items to move through. And the first thing that I have to do, you have to forgive me for this, but we now have council chamber microphone etiquette and usage that we have to remind members, and that's my job to do that. Can I remind all attendees when they're using their microphones to use them by turning on the microphone when speaking, ensuring that you speak into the microphone itself or in the direction of the microphone. As I go through this, by the way, it reminds me of the strictly conditions of service and everything, that terms where you get rapidly sort of read out by interesting celebrities, but I'm sorry, you've just got me. As I was saying, once you've finished speaking, please turn it off. Correct usage of the system will allow for, I like this bit, an enjoyable sound experience for all. You'll find a laminated copy of the detailed instructions on each row. That's principally for members in the chamber, but for speakers as well, we have the microphone on the lectern on my left, which you'll be advised which button to press when you come up. So that's the microphone etiquette section. So we welcome you to this planning committee meeting here on the 20th of December. And first of all, can we go through the procedural items and begin with, are there any declarations of interest?
Nothing indicated.
No, thank you, nothing indicated. So we move on to confirmation of the minutes. The minutes have been circulated for the 29th of November. And all those in favour of being a correct record, please can you show? Thank you, that's carried. As substitute members, I believe there are no substitute members, but I will get confirmation of that.
No, Chairman, we have a full house today.
All right, full house, thank you. In the run-up to Christmas, that's quite an achievement, so well done. Thank you for coming this morning. So we move on to our decision items. And the first decision item is fairly straightforward, item 4, and it's to do with reserve planning members. We have 7 at the moment, and we've had an expression of interest from Councillor William Taylor to be an additional member as a sub-member of the planning committee. And we can take a vote. Are we all happy that Councillor Taylor joins our happy band? All those in favour? As unanimous, thank you. Carried. So we can give him the joyful news that if he's had second thoughts, it's too late because we've put him on anyway. Okay. Very important role that the subs play in the unavailability of regular members. If they're available, that means you get some continuity because they're required to do the requisite training, etc. So we're going to move on to item 1. Which is with regard to Roseacre, 14 Wildings Lane, Lytham St Anne's, FY8 3RJ. And as you can see in your papers, this involves various aspects: demolition of dwelling and stable buildings, ground investigation, site clearance and preparation, surcharge materials, etc., temporary works, including construction access, site security fencing, provision of a contractor's compound, etc. And you can find that on page 7 of the report. There will be no speakers on this item. So basically, we will just have a presentation by one of our officers, and I think it's Andrew in this case. Oh, Rob, sorry, Rob Buffham. And when he's completed the presentation, we will then have a time for questions and debate and then decide on that particular application. So I'm going to hand over now to Rob while he presents his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Merry Christmas, everyone. So as Chair has said, the application in front of us is basically an application to prepare the red edge that we see in front of us for housing development. The site is located as per the red line image on the aerial photograph. So just
Can I just interrupt for a moment? Can I just check the TV up there is working okay, isn't it? Thank you. It's just sometimes we have a problem, but it's working okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Just so members can visualise where we are in St Anne's, the Booth supermarket is here. The junction to the opposite side of Hayhouses Lane is Wildings Lane that leads up to the application site. Hayhouses Lane obviously is the main road into Lytham, but it also serves as a main road into Blackpool. That's the Queensway Road, working its way around the back of the runway. Miller Carter here. Some members might recall that this site was resolved to approve for housing back in April of this year. We subsequently received this plan application prior to the Section 106 being agreed, which meant basically we couldn't determine this application at that time. The application for housing has now been approved. That grant consent for up to 52 dwellings on the site, and that was issued on the 7th of this month. Just for a bit of context, the site and the fields to the north, obviously in that aerial, they do display a rural character. But what this slide demonstrates is how the land around is going to change. So we can see the first phases of the Queensway residential development in this image here. That will extend into these 3 fields, either side of the existing care home that's now operational. And then also we have the red edge of the application site here. So we can see in time how the appearance of the site and the character around there is going to be changing quite significantly. Just for a bit of context in terms of the site itself, that blue line illustrates the extent of the housing as part of the Queensway scheme. We can see the care home that's operational to the north. We've also got the existing housing within the settlement of St Anne's to the south. Just a couple of slides which illustrate, give a bit of context to the site itself. So we've got the bungalow, which is to the top left, which is due for demolition. Stable buildings top right, which are due for demolition. And the 2 below images, the one on the left hand side is just a long shot looking back towards the settlement of St Anne's. You can see the bungalow here, the stables, and that line approximately is the edge of the application site. Wildings Lane obviously serves as access temporarily for the care home. They put a temporary patch on the top of Wildings Lane, and as you can see in the right hand image, that is a Wildings Lane shot looking towards the care home. Just for a bit of background, the care home operator has to deliver off-site highway works for Wildings Lane. So that incorporates footpath provision and a reprioritisation of Wildings Lane. At the moment, you have to take a right-hand turn into Jubilee, which is the wider housing estate. Wildings Lane will be reprioritised so that the main road of Wildings Lane continues into that Jubilee Lane, and then you have to take a left-hand turn to continue along Wildings Lane. The proposal itself, it obviously involves demolition of all the buildings, so that's the dwelling and the bungalow. It also involves enabling works to facilitate construction of the housing scheme. The main works involved is the laying of surcharge material on the site. So that surcharge material is very similar to the works that have been undertaken on the existing housing scheme that's under construction. Indeed, that photo It's taken from Google, but it's quite accurate in the sense that that surcharge material that you can see there is still in situ at the moment, so that you can give an impression in terms of what the site is going to be like once the surcharge material is laid. For those who don't know, I certainly didn't know prior to doing this application, surcharging basically it's there to stabilise the ground. So at the moment, for those of us who live in St Anne's, there's certain areas of St Anne's which they've been built on but are suffering subsidence. So properties are suffering subsidence, roads and drainage runs there suffering subsidence. So the main aim of the surcharging is to basically compact the peat underneath the land to squeeze all the water and the air out, so that will allow a solid foundation for the houses to be built on. The surcharge material, once it's been placed on the site, it will undertake a period of monitoring to establish that the land has stabilised, and once it is stabilised, then the houses obviously could then be constructed. That would involve the scraping away of some of the surcharge material to the level of the housing site. And the level of the housing site will not be determined by this surcharging application. That will be determined by the housing consents. The scheme also involves the widening of the existing field access into the site, so that's to facilitate the construction arrangement. There's also a provision of temporary compounds. There's going to be 2 compounds over the whole process of the scheme, but it will only ever be 1 compound in situ, and that compound will obviously be moved around the development site as the works progress. There'll also be a secure mesh fence line around the site, and that will be as you can see in that screenshot image above. So the main issues: the site is a non-strategic housing site, as we can see by the adopted local plan. It has outline consent for housing. Because of the nature of that outline consent, further application is needed for reserved matters. So those who aren't familiar with that process, the outline will deal with basic matters such as principle. It could deal with access, which the current outline consent deals with. But then a subsequent application will be needed to put the detail that wasn't provided at the outline stage. So the layout of the scheme, the landscaping, what the houses look like, those kind of things. So the surcharging works which are proposed would normally be undertaken as part of that housing approval. In this circumstance though, and it's quite an unusual circumstances because I don't think we've ever had an application like this before. The reason why the applicant wants to undertake or submit the application, so that they can speed up the site preparation works. So normally they would have to wait until the reserve matters and the condition discharge of the housing scheme is undertaken before starting those surcharging works. But if approved today, obviously this consent would stand separate from the housing consents, allowing them to do those surcharge works, which should speed up the delivery of the housing on that site by obviously fast tracking the surcharging works prior to the reserve matters applications being determined. As you can see from that photo, it doesn't result in a very nice looking site, but I think what we've got to realise is that these works are a necessary requirement to deliver the housing on that site. They would only be temporary until the housing is obviously constructed, and then obviously after that time, then the appearance of that surcharge material will be replaced by the housing development. One concern I had was, obviously this is a standalone application, and what would happen in the event that the housing scheme wasn't delivered? We could be left with the surcharge material left on site indefinitely, which was one of the reasons why we didn't want to determine the housing application until, we didn't want to determine the current application, the surcharge application, until we determine the housing scheme. So that would allow us then to allow a period of time related to the housing scheme that the surcharge materials on site if the housing scheme's expired, so that the housing couldn't be delivered, that would be the trigger then for site restoration. Now that site restoration could involve removal of the fill that's been placed. The downfall to that is that if it is removed, obviously then there's construction vehicles associated with removing that fill, but then they would have to go back and replace that fill at a later date. The other option could be to just soil the site and grass it over, and then once housing is brought forward, then those levels could then be scraped back to provide a solid foundation again for the housing scheme. The other main issue is highways. Obviously, the construction will require access along Wildings Lane. Out and beyond Wildings Lane, it's restricted to main road networks such as M55, Progress Way and Queensway, and then via Hayhouses Lane onto Wildings Lane. There are site deliveries, obviously. Those are scheduled between 8 and 4, Monday to Friday. There is no working, so there's no deliveries on Saturday or Sundays or bank holidays, albeit works will still be able to progress on a Saturday. The application was accompanied by a construction traffic management plan. I've summarised key elements of that in the slide below. But importantly, though, the Highway Authority doesn't have any objection to the scheme as proposed, and that's based primarily on the fact that they didn't object to the housing scheme. Obviously, when they were assessing the housing scheme, they were assessing the construction activity associated to that housing scheme. They did require conditions for that housing scheme, which required a construction traffic management plan, which has been submitted to support this current application. So they advise of conditions requiring construction to accord with that traffic management plan as submitted, but also road survey work. So that road survey work will monitor any damage that's caused by the construction activity along Wildings Lane. Usually that condition isn't enforceable, so it's not a condition that we would normally apply, but because of the nature of vehicles that use Wildings Lane, it would be much easier to determine whether or not any damage to that highway was as a result of the construction vehicles. So we do think that it's a condition that can be applied in this circumstance. That condition will also apply to any movement of the fill material from the site as well. So in the circumstance where the housing schemes expire and we are potentially requiring the removal of fill material from the site. The other main issue is amenity. Obviously, residents that live adjacent to the site, they will suffer from disturbance during the construction activities. The applicant has submitted a construction environmental method statement, which confirms working hours, the issue of leaflets to residents to update them with contact details and progress on site. It also includes wheel wash and road sweeping to minimise dust and debris that may be transferred from the site onto the roads, and also noise, vibration and dust management strategies, which again importantly refers to, from a dust perspective, water dampening if the work's been undertaken during dry weather. Unfortunately, there's always going to be some kind of disturbance during construction for neighbours. The planning process though is designed to intervene so we can put certain safeguard measures in place to minimise that impact. The main one that we do use is construction hours. That can be applied to the delivery hours as well, which is recommended in the suggested conditions, but also wheel wash facilities and the noise and dust vibration controls, which are contained within the construction environmental method statement provided by the applicant. The environmental protection team has considered the submission and they don't have any objection, considering that the impact to neighbours obviously is going to be there, but will be sufficiently dealt with through the construction environmental method statement and the strategies that are contained within it. They are the main issues, Chair. That's why we're recommending members support the application subject to the appropriate conditions and adoption of the habitat regs assessment.
Thank you, Rob. We'll come to Councillor Armitt in a second. I just wanted to emphasise that this is quite unusual because on page 10 it says the proposal for assessment is unusual in the sense that the works would normally be considered during assessment applications for the site's redevelopment or condition discharge. Rob's explained that, so it's important to take this into consideration that the intention is to actually quicken up the time frame in terms of the construction time frame. Am I right in saying that, Rob?
That's correct, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armitt.
Thanks, Richard. It's actually more about education and planning again here as much as anything. I think having just been through this as a bigger construction just past this, then all the road stuff, the cleaning, the tidying, we've just been through it all. And so we can't really have a comment on that because it's just been concluded 50 yards up the road on exactly the same axis on a much bigger scale. So I'm actually happy to move this, but I want to ask you just a general question on the scope and responsibility of planning. So back in the 80s, you're right, a lot of the houses behind the Vic were subsiding to a level where, as an insurance organisation, we could barely get mortgages or insurance for those homes. We then put onto Cypress Point massive lakes and huge drainage and 10 piles to make those houses stay upright for a while and push that water somewhere else. And now we're building on Queensway on what looks like a paddy field half the time, and we're pushing that water somewhere else. It's known as the Moss, and there's a clue in that name. This water eventually ends up somewhere. And is there any risk in continually pushing and piling that it will come into houses that have been there for 100 odd years that weren't affected, that could now find themselves having water pushed in that direction? And in planning, how much responsibility do we have for, I know it's buyer beware, and all these houses that are flooding around the country are generally in new builds and they shouldn't have bought them in the first place, but is there a buyer beware or a planning responsibility to not put places where we know it's likely after a decade not to be stable? Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Armitt. That was a nice question. Knowing this site, obviously the land levels to the housing to the south and to the north at the moment are substantially below, above the application site. The levels will be built up temporarily, but from recollection in terms of what I've seen in the housing scheme, the levels are still going to be below the existing houses. So in essence, if there is any water push displaced off site, then it's not going to go towards the house, it's going to go in the opposite direction. Obviously, we have to bear in mind that this site is allocated for housing. It has to deliver those houses. We don't want to repeat the mistakes that previous have made in terms of subsiding properties, which is why these works are necessary to be undertaken. In terms of responsibilities, flooding of other properties, like I say, I don't anticipate that will happen. I'm not a professional, I can't guarantee that, but I certainly don't anticipate that to happen, particularly bearing in mind that there will need to be drainage strategies adopted within the housing scheme to deal with any surface water flows which would have normally percolated through the site but are falling on the site, so would have to be dealt with sustainably in that fashion. The strategy that I've seen in terms of the housing scheme, that basically will attenuate water on the site and then will discharge into the brook that runs along this eastern elevation of the application site, but also along the rest of the housing allocation, and that continues into the wider Moss area. So at the moment you have a situation where water is falling on that site, it's falling through the site and it's lying in the peat until such time it discharges elsewhere. That won't be available when the housing scheme comes forward because we've obviously squashed that capacity to do that. But the water still that falls on top of that land will be dealt with through the surface water drainage conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you. I think Councillor Armitt's just asked what I was going to ask, really. I was going to ask about drainage conditions and will they be coming through as part of the wider housing scheme? Because that was one concern. So I'll leave that. Just out of interest, I mean, I'm very pleased to see the condition and seeking restoration if the housing scheme's not constructed. Without that, I wouldn't support it. With it, I think I can. Just out of interest, where will the access for those 52 houses come in future? Because I remember we were stopping off Wildings Lane because of the at one point, or will that feed in through sort of the Jubilee estate, or will it become part of the wider Queensway estate? And are we still having a block on those roads in future? I know that's not for this application, for the larger one, but just out of interest.
Yeah, you're right. Obviously, we can only consider the application in front of us at the moment. The highway strategy for Wildings Lane is once the housing allocation, so the Queensway allocation gets built out, the only site that will be accessed by Wildings Lane is going to be this application site. There's going to be a closure at this point where it will become a footpath and shared cycleway. That will obviously link into the housing scheme. This site and the care home in time, they will be accessed through the Queensway development. The care home obviously does use Wildings Lane temporarily at the moment. They do have the appropriate consents in place to do that, though. But it is only on a temporary basis until such time that that road closure can take place.
I just wanted to know if there's a definition of temporary, because I can't see that happening in my lifetime.
Thank you, Chair. Am I right in saying that this surcharge is going to cover the whole site and there will be no sustainable drainage pond there? They've avoided that because basically they can shove it out onto the rest of the moss.
What else? Yeah, it's going to cover the whole site. It needs to cover the whole site. Drainage-wise, though, obviously the material is porous, so it will allow that filtering through as opposed to runoff. We can see that in other examples in the Queensway scheme, which, as far as I'm aware, haven't resulted in any. There might be might get pooling, ponding on the site where there's undulations, but obviously the fill material that's been deposited on the other housing schemes, they are obviously very close to houses which are now occupied. And as far as I'm aware, Andrew might tell me differently, but I'm not aware of any flooding issues as a consequence of the surcharge material that's been deposited. On the basis, I presume that it does allow still the flow of water through the material that's deposited. So in essence, the fill is a sustainable drainage system because it allows that percolation and infiltration.
But they will tarmac over a lot of it, won't they?
When the housing scheme comes forward, but not as part of the surcharging application. The surcharging application, the finish will be, as we can see there.
Am I right in saying that they will just allow this surcharge naturally to subside, or are they going to roll it or anything like that to sort of speed anything up? It's just a natural process that could take months and months, years. I don't know.
It's exactly that. They apply a weight that squashes the sponge, pushes the water and all the air out, but they have to monitor it, and they have to monitor it over a particular period of time to establish that over that time there's no movement or settlement of the fill that they put down there.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. I echo the comments that have already been made to a certain extent. My main concerns are, I don't have any issues with this application as it stands. Obviously, the water does go somewhere. Displacement will mean that it's going to appear somewhere, and it is a wet area, so we're going to have to be careful and monitor that. But my question realistically is, I note that obviously Highways have said they don't have a problem with this. subject to a traffic management plan being put in place while the work's being carried out. My concern is that the Queensway development as a whole is a substantial development, which is, especially at rush hour, going to push more traffic onto the B5261. And as you know, one of the main roads coming into St Anne's, I believe, is St Anne's Road East, or that end of the road that then filters into the square. Should we be looking to make some representation to LCC about either some lights or some kind of traffic permanent management on there that will help to continue to the flow to continue more smoothly once that extra housing estate is completed? Thank you.
Would you like to respond? Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously the Highway Authority considered the information that was contained in the application. That confirmed the construction routing of vehicles to and from the site. That's obviously confirmed Wildings Lane, Hayhouses Lane, Queensway, up towards the M55. If they thought that there was any issues with that route, then they would, I would hope, have told me so, and suggested means of mitigating that. They haven't done. So from a highway safety perspective, we have to assume that the development will be constructed in a safe fashion. From an office perspective, I am not concerned as much with the main road network. It's more how the construction vehicles interact with Wildings Lane that's important, because at the moment there's only a portion of footpath. Where there isn't a footpath, obviously, you're going to have pedestrians because it is a good walking route for early morning walks with your dog. So that is my main concern. The construction method statement does cover that, though, in terms of signage, road sweeping, wheel wash facilities, to minimise that impact with pedestrians that might be using Wildings Lane. So.
And I think I'd make a broader point that clearly what we're looking at here is looking specifically at this application, but we also have an understanding in terms of infrastructure projects more widely, you know, in terms of the enterprise zone in Blackpool, which will affect us, in terms of the M55 link road, when that will be finished. But obviously the plan is that that's going to be finished in the new year at some point, or in spring at least. And although they are pertinent, you know, this specific application has to stand alone in that term. And as you say, if the Transport Authority is sort of, you know, saying that, you know, proper arrangements are in place and they don't feel that there's going to be a particular concern or problem in terms of the additional flow, then we have to take that, don't we, Rob?
We do. No, it's a fair point, that, Chair. Obviously, there is quite a lot of development happening at the moment. Once that new road link opens, then that's going to reduce pressure on the Queensway Road. In theory, vehicles, instead of coming from Lytham, heading out to Blackpool, there's another option, there's another route out of Lytham St Anne's, which isn't there at the moment. So there won't be as many vehicles using that stretch of the road, which obviously will help the main road network as well from a construction perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This stabilisation process, approximately how long is that going to go on?
Unknown.
Oh.
Are they talking about 8 months?
That's the construction period. But in terms of the actual stabilisation period, it's they have to monitor it. It could continue to move about. It could settle within the first couple of months, but it could be 6, 7, 8 months. It could be longer. There's no approximation of it, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay.
But what I would say is obviously that there's conditions in place to ensure that the surcharge material is only there in temporary fashion.
What classes as temporary?
It's a 5-year period,
Right, okay.
which is associated to the time frame for the construction of the houses.
Right, okay. And the other question is that the traffic management plan, who enforces that if vehicles are turning up earlier and just sitting on Wildings Lane waiting to go into the, because they do, at building sites, you see the vehicles turn up, they sit and wait until the 8 o'clock time. They can, when they were building at the back of us, they were sat there from 6 in the morning, just waiting to go on site at 8. Who monitors these things?
We're relying, the planning department don't actively go out and monitor to see construction activity times or when deliveries are turning up. We're relying more on neighbours making representations to us. We
Good
can
luck with
then,
yeah, and Wildings Lane is quite degraded as it is, isn't it? If you look at one of those pictures, you can see it's the surface is already gone. Are they going to do something to remedy that before they start putting more vehicles?
It's my understanding, and sorry to just correct me if I'm right here, because I want to obviously get to the vote, because I think we've got some sort of agreement about this. But what I would say is, in the report, I think there's a reference to an assessment survey in terms of how that road sits at the moment, in terms of its condition. And then there'll be an assessment at the end of the construction phase. And then clearly you can then assess what damage that has been done, and that will have to be restored. I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I?
yeah, you're right. The only thing I'd add is that I think it would be pointless at this time to put a new surface down on that road, because obviously it's going to be churned up again by the construction vehicles relative to the surcharge application, but also the housing application. So the best time really to do the resurfacing works is after the housing.
Yeah, I probably understand that, but
And
does
there's
that make it a safe road then?
Well, we don't know, do we? At the moment, it's safe. We don't know whether there's going to be any damage from the construction activity.
Okay, right.
Right, I'm going to move to the vote. We've got a proposer, Councillor Armitt, and we've seconded by Councillor Dixon. Could I ask you to indicate all those in favour? Please raise your hand. And all those against? One against. Any abstentions? Thank you. It's carried.
Yep, thank you, Chairman, and good morning to members of the Planning Committee. So I'm going to present on a case of a householder application, references 23-0702 at 7 Ruby Road, Ray Green. The reason for this case to brought to committee is because the officer recommendation for approval is in conflict with the parish council comments. So on this slide, you can see the application boundary, which is the red boundary on the left-hand side of the map. And then it is an end of terrace, 2-story dwelling house. And on the right-hand side of the map, you can see the location and the things surrounding the application site. So the green is shown on the cursor here. And to provide more context of the site, so this site is located in the northeastern edge of the Ray Green Conservation Area. The application proposal. So the proposed development is the erection of a single-story detached residential annex within the rear garden for use in association with number 7 Ruby Road. So this proposed development requires planning permission because it is an operational development which exceeds the height limit set out in the permitted development order, which allows domestic outbuildings to be built. I would like to draw the attention to members that uses taking place within the curtilage, which are incidental to the enjoyment of the dwelling house, is not a material change of use, hence not a development. So uses incidental to the enjoyment can be like annex, which are accommodated by extended family members. So the focus of this case is that the operational development element of this application rather than the use itself. And this is the scheme itself. So it is a single-story outbuilding used as a residential annex. So the front elevation, they got a decking and a bifold door system and a bedroom window. And at the rear elevation, they have the living room window and bathroom window. No windows will be added to the side elevation of the outbuilding. So I'm moving on the assessment part. The first section of the assessment is about the impact on the appearance and character of the neighborhood. So for the appearance, so as seen in photo 1, this image is taken at the rear garden within the application boundary. So the proposed annex is inside the rear garden within the residential curtilage. So the annex is modest in size and demonstrate a subordinate relationship with the main dwelling house. And I'm going to talk about street scene, so it's related to the character of the neighborhood. So photo 2 is taken at the front elevation of the property, so which is from Rigby Road. And photo 3 is the rear elevation of the property taken from Churchville Fold. So the proposed annex will not intrude to the street scene. And so for this section, the conclusion is that there will be no adverse impact on the character and appearance of the neighborhood. Moving on to the next section, as this application site is within the Ray Green Conservation Area, so we did make assessment on the impact on heritage asset. So also 2 elements. The first element is the frontage of the property. So as seen on the photo number 2. So the frontage of the property, I will look for 3 things. The first thing is the facade of the application site. And the second thing is the historical roofscape. And the third thing is street scene. So all 3 elements remain unaltered as a result of this development. And photo number 3 is the rear elevation of the application property. So the proposed annex will not intrude the street scene on the rear. And photo number 3 is looking into the conservation area from the Churchville Fold, because Churchville Fold itself is not inside the conservation area. So the conclusion of this assessment is that no harm will be imposed to the conservation area, as the character and appearance of the conservation area will not be harmed. And moving on to the next section, it's about the proposed development and the relationship with the neighbor. So I'll talk about number 9 Rigby Road. So this is a terrace property at the east of the application site, as shown in purple on the slide. So the main focus here is about the daylight impact. So the daylight impact on the dwelling house itself and the rear garden. And the conclusion is that there will be only no adverse impact on the daylight elements. And for the use as a rear garden of this neighboring property will not be affected. And moving on is number 3 Rigby Road and number 5 Rigby Road. So these 2 properties are at the west of the application site. Number 3, the curtilage is the L shape marked in blue, and number 5 is shown in yellow. So both the amenity and privacy impact will not up to an adverse level of impact. And for number 1 Churchville Fold, as shown in light blue, this neighboring property possesses a side-to-side relationship with the application property. No privacy impact will be resulted, as there is no window on the side elevation of the outbuilding. And given the separation distance of 10 meters between this neighboring property and the application property, it is believed that no adverse impact will be resulted on the daylight or loss of outlook. And for number 2 Churchville Fold, so this application property is at the south of the application property, and this neighboring property side, the side elevation of this neighboring property is facing the rear boundary of the application property. So although the annex I mean the outbuilding of the application site is around 4 meters from the site elevation of this neighboring property. But I would like to point out that proximity to a neighboring property is not a justifiable reason for refusal unless adverse impact to neighboring occupiers' amenity is resulted. So for privacy impact, although there is windows at the rear elevation of this outbuilding, but given at the site, the boundary treatment is already 2 meters in height, and the window itself is around 1.8 meters from the internal ground level, which is about eye level. No unacceptable impact on privacy will be resulted. And for daylight impact, it's believed adverse impact will not be triggered as the annex is only single story. And for this neighboring property, there is no windows for habitable rooms on the first floor elevation facing this application property. Moving on a section about parking and access arrangement. So I would like to talk about the policy background about this. So paragraph 111 on NPPF, the September version, and is on paragraph 115 on the newest version, stated that development should only be prevented or refused on highways ground if there's an unacceptable impact on highway safety. So the situation, the application property itself does not provide any off-road parking. So therefore, the proposed development will not lead to loss of parking space. And as the proposed development is to provide additional accommodation for the host property rather than a separate dwelling. So it is believed it will not lead to a significant increase in parking demand and traffic volumes. And putting in the site condition, there is a public transport option available, and there's also off-road, also roadside parking nearby. So it is believed that unacceptable highway safety impact will not be resulted for this case. So moving on to the recommendation. So this case is recommended for approval with 5 associated conditions. I'm going to go through condition 4 and 5 in detail. Condition 4 and 5, the rationale of these 2 conditions is to prevent the departure of the outbuilding to use as an annex. Condition 4 sets out some of the restriction, and the annex shall not be sold, sublet, or otherwise occupied independently of the main dwelling as a separate unit. And for condition 5, it is a physical restriction to remove the PD rights of erecting a fence gate so that it will subdivide or segregate the annex from the dwelling house. Because this site has a side gate, so if a fence is erected at the rear garden, it might provide exclusive access to the annex from Ruby Road. So as the case, the basis of assessment and assumption is from the point that this application, the annex, the outbuilding will use as an annex. So the rationale for these 2 conditions is to prevent the departure from this basis of assessment and assumption. And these conditions are enforceable. So this is the end of my presentation, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to bring in Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That gives us plenty of information there. I'm happy with this application. I don't think it, like you said, it doesn't have any adverse effect on the neighbours or the conservation area. It's quite enclosed within the curtilage of the property. I think the safeguards and conditions are important because obviously we've discussed previously about outbuildings then being utilised as Airbnbs and stuff like that. So the measures that have been in place to stop that happening in the future. And on that basis, I'm happy to propose the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we have a proposer. Councillor Settle, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't remember you mentioning what the objections were from the parish council.
Page 33 of the report. So the one of the objection reason by parish council is that the roof height will protrude approximately 70 cm higher than the rear fencing of the neighbouring properties. And Parish Council is also concerned about the precedent being set by approving a separate residential annex is also a concern. So in the officer report, on page 41, the second section of the response to comments during consultation period, I'd respond that each application has to be considered on its own merits. So I don't believe this case, should it be approved, it will lead to any read across indication to the area of the conservation area. So this the response on that. And on the response on page 39 about relationship with neighbors, I already covered about how the relationship between the outbuildings and the neighboring property at number 2 Chatfield Fold. So that's my response to the comments from Parish Council.
You just put the picture back up of the actual building. It looks like a summer house to me.
You mean the...
Yeah, just
These?
yeah, that bit, yeah.
Yeah.
That's almost a flat roof, then, is it?
Councillor Second, sorry, if I can assist as well. Yeah, I think my reading of the Parish Council's concerns were that they had two elements. They had an element that this building was going to be dominating to its neighbours. And I think that's not the case. Having been to the site and seen the existing boundary fences and hedges and things, looked at the context alongside Kenneth. I think it's, excuse me, it is a relatively modestly sized building. It has a flat roof, and there are sizable hedges and fences around. So I think the relationship to neighbours is acceptable. It may well be that the Parish Council haven't had the benefit of actually getting to see it, because you can saw from the street scene pictures, you don't actually see the site. So I think that's one point. I think the other point they're concerned about is this the fact that it is a residential annex, and as Kenneth said, with the principle of a residential annex is something that we get quite a lot of. We get, you know, home offices, you know, granny flats or whatever. That type of accommodation is something that is reasonably common. And the test we need to look at is whether it's causing any harm, rather than whether it's unacceptable in principle. And that's why we've gone through the sort of detailed assessment in the report and the presentation to look at the potentials for harm. And in this case, concluded there aren't any, whereas in others, the appeal situation we talked about at the last meeting, for example, there were harms created, and that's why we sought to resist that scheme.
Okay, thanks. I'm happier now. I've seen that diagram again. The roof line. Thank you.
Are you happy enough to second it?
I'll second it. Yeah. Thanks.
We'll go on to Councillor Armett.
It's just hopefully 2 brief points. My continual frustration of parish councillors putting you to this amount of work and then not coming to represent themselves when they've got an issue to raise. It's just such a waste of your time. And thank you for the great job you've done. Until you got to condition 4, I was just internally giggling at this beautiful Airbnb with a kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom. And it is absolutely, I mean, okay, let's see what happens. But in terms of enforcements, once it's found to be possibly used as an Airbnb or a rental property, what do we do? And what do we take all the money off them? Do we knock it down? What do we do to actually enforce them? Because we're not historically been great at that area.
Could I just say that's speculation? We're dealing with the application in front of us.
I'm asking about enforcement.
Yes, I know. And so, but you know, we will answer it. But obviously, we don't know what will happen.
Absolutely, no.
Just to make that clear.
But enforcement is the question.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think to make our enforcement easier, clearly it's a potential that could arise. So condition 4 prevents that. So if it does arise, there is a breach of condition there, and that is something that we can enforce to require the building to be removed, should that be the ultimate situation. Condition 5, as Kenneth says, there is the potential for an alternative access to the site. So we wanted to ensure that there was no physical barrier between the building and the dwelling, which is something that you would likely to have if we just go back to the site photograph. If that, no, the other one. So that photograph's taken from the back of the application property.
and the building goes roughly where that timber shed is at the moment. So with that close relationship, you wouldn't operate it as an Airbnb without some form of physical barrier. And that's why condition 5 prevents the erection of that physical barrier without planning permission. And obviously that's something that the neighbours are going to be able to see from their upstairs windows, and be able to alert us to something that's happening that perhaps isn't within the scope of the planning permission that could be granted today. So with those protections in place, we feel that we have the opportunity to ensure that this is delivered in the way that we're told it's being delivered in the application.
Well, can you wait till the others, because we've got a number of names, and we'll put your name down, Councillor Collins, if that's okay. Councillor Griffiths, please.
Yeah, you've just confirmed my query. The only access is through the main property. Thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you. See, on the property, it's, well, in the new build, it's got plumbing, a bathroom. How is it connecting? Is it connecting to the services that are directly behind it, or are they going to have to dig the whole of their garden up to get to the services that are for the property itself?
I would expect that it's an annex to the application property. So if we go to the site plan, again, Kenneth, please. I'm expecting them to run a service from the dwelling back up to where the annex is.
Yeah, it's quite a big garden, isn't it?
Yeah, in the planning statement submitted by the applicant, they already say the drainage and things will be connected to the main dwelling house. So this is confirmed in the planning statement submitted by the applicant.
Okay, dig up the garden then.
Thank you. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pursue this one about where the water is going, basically, I'd be worried about how much of the water from this roof area is going to maybe flood the bottom of the garden, or is it going to be contained entirely within this property and be taken away? It just seems to me that you might well have water that's going to penetrate through the hedge, etc., into next door's garden.
I'll make an initial response to that. So, for the concern about drainage, so the proposed annex will lead to an increase in site coverage of about 48 square meters within the residential curtilage. So, during the assessment process, it's believed that this increase in site coverage, the extent, is not likely to lead to a first drainage impact on that, given the size, compare between the annex itself and the large the generous rear garden size of this application property.
Yeah, if I can sort of add to that, the building is going to be constructed with a flat roof. It's going to have gutters and downspouts from that flat roof. Those will the application, the part of the application property where the building is located is at a slightly higher level than the dwelling, so it would naturally drain back towards the applicant's house. So I'm sure they would want to make sure that that is directed into the surface water drainage system that serves that property, in the same way that the drainage from the existing shed that's in that location, you could see on the earlier photograph, will be will be handled that way.
But this is bigger than the shed, isn't it?
This is larger than the shed, yeah.
How much larger than the shed?
In percentage terms, I don't know, but the shed is a fair size. So it's probably, I don't know, a third again bigger, something like that. You know, if you look back at the photograph of the garden, the shed covers two. So you go up that path from the house, and there's another little shed behind those bushes that you can't quite see there. So whilst it's one larger building across the back of the garden, the existing arrangement is that there are those two sheds that do cover the width of that garden. So in reality, the difference isn't going to be that much greater. It's just going to be a single building rather than the sheds, the two sheds that you have there at the moment. it was absolutely tipping it down when I did my site visit. So, I should have paid more attention to which way the water was flowing, I suppose.
My only comment would be if you were going to build an extension to your household, you wouldn't put it right down at the bottom of the garden. It just seems to me to be a bit sort of Victorian in terms of the little house, but that, you know, that's...
I suspect what may be happening here, Councillor, is that this is intended as perhaps as a temporary arrangement rather than, you know, going to the expense of, you know, 20, 30, whatever £1,000 to build an extension to the property, whereas you can locate an outbuilding like this if it's for a period of years, as I think somebody said, teenagers grow up and leave home, that kind of situation. So that's why, certainly, I don't know the personal circumstances here necessarily, but in general terms, that tends to be the type of reasoning. People have a home office in this type of accommodation, and they have it there because they may change their working arrangements in the future, and they have that kind of temporary arrangement, which may not be temporary in terms of months, it may be temporary in terms of years, but it's still logistically easier to provide in a detached building like this than a formal extension to the property.
Or they could have parties down at the bottom of the garden, which obviously would be perfect, but not necessarily good for the.
I was going to say, I think anybody can have parties at the bottom of the garden, so I'm not sure whether that's particularly pertinent. But thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to Councillor Armitt, when parish councils view planning applications, they haven't got the benefit of an officer's report. I know Newton Clifton Parish Council go into great detail when they make their submissions, and only a summary of that submission is presented to the committee. Now, any objection might have been addressed in the officer's report, and there's no real need for someone to take time off work to come to the council to sort of like put bones to the objection when that objection's been addressed. I don't think it's the parish council, I think it's the system where the parish council's made an objection, it's been addressed, but because they've made an objection, it comes to the committee. So the work of the parish councils, I've said it in the past that I always look at the parish council's comments when I look at an application, and I hope we can move to the vote now.
We'll take note of your comments as well. Thank you, Councillor Collins. We are indeed about to move to the vote. So we've had Councillor Evans proposing, Councillor Settle seconding this application. Could I ask you to show if you're in favour? Can you please raise your hands? I think that's unanimous, so I won't ask the redundant question. Thank you. And we now move to item 3. Right, thank you, members. With regard, and this is for information for the public and also for members in terms of how we're dealing with this particular application, I thought it would be useful at this stage just to go through the various stages that we will be moving through. And you'll see why I'm doing this. First of all, in the normal way, there will be an introduction to this particular application from the planning officer, who will present that. We will then ask, I think there are 4 registered speakers to come out and speak, and the Vice Chair will explain the protocol, etc., and how that process works. And then after that, there will be, amongst members, with the public still here, we will give consideration of whether to exclude the public, which is item 6. We will debate that if it's necessary and then vote. If we vote that that is what we consider is to be appropriate in this particular case, the chamber then will be cleared. We will then, members, have a discussion of confidential matters, item 7. And during that discussion, we will obviously be very much aware, you know, of those confidential things that you've got, items in your particular report. After that discussion has taken place, the members of the public will be invited back into the public session, and the clerk will kindly go out to retrieve the public. And the planning officer will then continue with his presentation. And in the normal way, we will then give consideration, debate, and vote on the planning application. I'm saying this so that I'm trying to be helpful in terms of members and members of the public, how we intend to deal with the application. So it's upfront, and I think it's the appropriate way to deal with it. So my first task is to...
Chairman, may I just for 1 second? I think just to make the point that any recording equipment will be switched off, and no recording will be published of any exempt sections of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vice Chair. So could I ask the planning officer to begin his introduction, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. So this application, reference 230521, relates to a detached property on Mains Lane at number 178, so it's also known as Normandy. And also just to draw your attention that there are some comments from Councillor Lee in support of the application on your late observation schedule. The location of the site is in this area here. It's actually sort of the end property as you're coming along Mains Lane. You can see from this aerial photograph the construction works of the new Skippool to Windy Harbour A585 bypass. So as the road swings off the current line of Mains Lane, the property is at the end here. In terms of aerial photograph of the site itself, you see it's a detached property, garage at the rear, just a bit clearer on this location plan, site plan. So that's the detached property, that's the existing garage, and this is the neighbouring property, which you can see sits here. And that's obviously recently constructed. You can see on this aerial photograph, garden, etc., is still to be formed. In regards to some photographs, just to give some context, obviously from the front of the building in the property's curtilage on the left, from outside, and this is just on the footpath of the rear aligned Old Mains Lane, looking at the property. So you can see there it's a sort of a dormer style bungalow property with a larger gable towards the front. Again, this is showing the alignment from the Old Mains Lane, and again you can see the side elevation, and then the photograph on the right is just demonstrating how the property is set back some distance from Mains Lane itself. To the rear of the property, you can see it's more akin to a 2-storey property. The rear elevations are higher than those front ones. To the left there, on the left-hand photograph, you can see the garage. and that shows on the right its relationship to the property next door. And you see there's a tall boundary fence that runs along the boundary at the moment, and that the garage is about the same height as the top of that fence. And then looking from a different angle and just to get more detail of that, you see the garage door is to the side rather than from the frontage, and again that shows the relationship to the neighbouring property. And you can see in in this area here the glazed end gable of the neighbouring property. But in here you can see that the height of that fence is, you know, slightly higher than the eaves of the garage building itself. In terms of the setting, like I say, this is the end property just before you come into the more open area, and there's a gap before you get to Skippool itself. So I say that on this photograph here, you've got the property and the boundary of the property here, but the end of this open area beyond. And in plan form, what's being proposed, so you've got the property in line with the neighbouring dwelling, garage to the front. Elevationally, you can see that's introducing additional gables across the front, so it's got three sort of key feature gables across the front. The dotted line on this plan is the plan of the outline of the proposal that was originally submitted with the application prior to it being amended, and that's covered in the agenda paper. From the side, from the west, you get this elevation. This gable feature has been introduced since the original application was submitted, just because this building's got sort of two frontages with being on the end. From the other side, you've got this gable and this blank elevation on the rear sort of outrigger that comes out beyond the adjacent property. Garage itself, just a simple square double garage with a pyramidal roof. So again, just looking at the site plan, just to give you context, that's the existing dwelling, this is the proposed, and this is actually the older location site plan, but this one shows the existing footprint in blue with the proposed sort of superimposed over it, and obviously the garage to the front. So since this was done, the garage area, sorry, the drive area at the front has been rationalised. So, Chairman, we'll break there for the speakers.
A hand over to the Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Evans, for that. We have 4 speakers this morning. In order, I'll call them up: Claire Rimmer, Ken Minto, Peter Lemarinel, and Jonathan Abbott-Hull. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. As you come towards the end of that, if you're still speaking, I'll give you a warning that you've got the last few seconds. So, first of all, could I call Claire Rimmer?
The microphone's on.
Perfect. Hello.
3 minutes.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name's Claire Rimmer, and I was invited by Mrs. Cowburn, who can't be with us today, to speak on her behalf. So the family respects that obviously planning regulations are there for a reason, and acknowledges that the redevelopment is substantially bigger than the current dwelling. However, it's not a frivolous development. It will be for a family of 5, including 3 adults and 2 children, as well as 2 living carers. So there'll be 7 people living there altogether. And wheelchair mobility access is needed for 3 residents in the house. The redevelopment makes provisions for people with disabilities in line with GD7N, including safe and accessible parking areas for disabled people, GD7J, without affecting the highways. The redevelopment supports the cross-cutting theme from Chapter 9 of the local plan on promoting health and well-being, including avoiding poorly adapted homes for mobility restricted residents that undermine well-being. It supports Strategic Objective 5 to develop diverse and healthy communities, allowing a family with several disabled members to stay in their local community. The family believes that development is the best alternative for their developing care needs and would find it difficult to find a similar property to accommodate 3 disabled people in wheelchairs and their carers, enabling the family to stay together. On policy H7, although much is made of the increase in size, due to the size of the current dwelling, only criterion B would apply, on the visual appearance and impact. The family has suggested ways to reduce the impact on the natural environment, believe the development relates well to the surrounding context, which includes a row of diverse dwellings of different designs and sizes, and believes the development to be of high quality new design, GD7. Conditions could be included by the committee on landscaping to ensure any impact is minimised and in keeping with surrounding rural areas, as well as suggested conditions on improving biodiversity and others as required. With this in mind, committee is respectfully requested to pass the development, as perhaps in this instance undue weight is given to visual impact, given the fact that the development is the end of the row of larger residences and a mishmash of styles, given the family's amenity to make changes to reduce the visual impact, and also the family's need to find accommodation suitable for their developing care needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. The next speaker I'd like to call is Mr. Ken Minto, please. And again, Mr. Minto, 3 minutes. I'll give you 9 if necessary.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Chair, councillors and council officers. As a resident of Mains Lane, I know a lot of people who are fellow residents down Mains Lane, and I've done a little bit of a survey on behalf of the client. Now, nobody's against this. It's a I know maybe 50 people who live down Mains Lane. I've done a random survey, and nobody's against this. In fact, we're all happy to have this house lived in once again. The previous occupant of this house was also disabled, but in a completely different way. So I can understand the family wanting to change the property to suit their needs. And I know the children, and I know the lady in question, and they are very badly disabled. And the quicker this is resolved, the better that there will be for their life expectancy, etc. So there is a little bit of, by the way, I'm a previous officer in the Merchant Navy, and I deal in facts. Now, you've stated, the planning officer has stated that the building is 330% larger than the existing home. And in actual fact, the math on it, the existing dwelling had a gross external footprint of 161 metres squared. The proposed replacement dwelling would have a gross external area of 475 metres squared. And the fully glazed garden room would have a gross area of 40 metres squared. This represents a potential increase of 195%, or 219 if you include the glazed garden room, a significant difference when compared to the figure of 330% quoted within the report. Furthermore, the existing detached garage has a gross area of 48 metres squared, and the replacement garage would have a gross area of 42 metres squared. This would be a 12.5% decrease in the area that the garage currently occupies. Thank you very much.
And the next speaker I'll call is Mr. Peter Marinell. Then Peter, with one in your own time.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members and officers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. Members will have read the exempted document, and so will be fully aware as to why this build is absolutely vital to this family. In respect to the filed local plan, regarding policy GD4, as this is a replacement development, I see nothing that would harm the rural impact visually, and certainly nothing that could not be mitigated by green infrastructure, as the eclectic nature and size of the properties along Mains Lane means that this development would not be out of character. Indeed, a new development of 7 bedrooms and 6 garages has been granted permission close by. Policy GD7 point D, this development will be no higher than the existing property, and GD7 point N gives weight to making provision for the needs with those who have got disabilities. I would ask you to please refer again to the exempted documents. I believe policy HP7 does not apply to this application. This policy was written to stop small groups of 2 and 3 bedroom houses or cottages being demolished in order to build one new large property. The existing property is already a single detached build with 4 bedrooms, and the new build will contain only 1 extra bedroom that will not be overbearing to its neighbour, especially when taking into consideration the size of the properties nearby. So little weight should be given to this policy in respect of this application. There have been no objections from the neighbours nor anyone else regarding this development. The applicant and her architect spoke with and met officers on numerous occasions and made every single change to the plans that the officers asked of them. And officers then decided that it should come to committee, which I think is the correct approach, so that members can see all aspects as to why this development should be granted. I will give reasons for granting this application as follows: that it meets policies GD4 as regards to visual harm and GD7 that relates to massing and disabilities, and that in this instance, policy HB7 does not apply to such an application as this one. So I would ask that you please grant this application. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Many thanks, Mr. Marinell. And the final speaker we have on this item is the agent, Mr. Jonathan Abbott-Hull. Mr. Abbott-Hull, if you'd care to come up. I'm sure you've done this before.
No, not for a long time, actually. Not for a long time. The last one's at uni.
3 minutes.
I might be cut short because our time is about 6 minutes, so I'll just come short. Good morning, all. My name's Jonathan Abbott-Hull. I made some kind of points, just going to kind of read it as quick as I can because it does kind of go over the time limit. Has it started now? Yeah. Okay, so the initial design brief, including the space and access requirements, was developed by an accommodation expert, a chartered architectural technologist who has spent the last 34 years designing homes for severely disabled people. The design brief, formed part of a legal court case. The client's space requirements have been established in court by medical and design specialists. The home has been designed for 3 disabled residents. All have the same degenerative health conditions. Is expected that the children will live in this home for the rest of their lives and require living carers in the future. The property has also been designed to accommodate the applicant's recently widowed father, who will potentially require care in the future. And obviously, the design promotes multi-generational living. This is a unique application and circumstances. The home has been designed to accommodate the family's needs now and into the future. Compromises. The accommodation expert suggests that the property should make allowances for 2 living carers with their own kitchen. We have provided 1 dedicated bedroom. I believe the kitchen will be shared between the family and carers. Appeal would have been a great benefit. However, this has been removed and a swim spa added. The client and I met with Mark Evans on the 14th of November. We discussed the concerns raised by the case officer and have made the following amendments to the plans. The width of the dwelling has been reduced and offset from both west and eastern boundaries has been increased. The property has been pushed back into the plot to improve the visibility of 176 Mains Lane, whilst also allowing the detached garage to the front to be moved further away from Mains Lane itself. It's currently 80 metres away from the front boundary. The eastern elevation has also been altered and additional features added to enhance the character and provide relief to the elevation. Vehicle access to the front has been centralised and the replaced boundary wall has been tiered with planting to soften the appearance and improve the site's biodiversity. Additional soft landscaping has been added to the front garden and the existing driveway and parking area has been reduced in size. In summary, we believe that all the concerns raised by Mark in the meeting were addressed. We also have provided confidential plans which demonstrate space requirements. The client and children have specific large medical equipment which needs to be used daily. This includes 2 standing frames, hoists around the bed, and fully accessible wet rooms and also specialist furniture. Going on to policy, policy H7, report reference to policy H7, and that should be applied to properties within the defined countryside area. It stipulates that the council's approach to implementation of the policy and how this is born from an appeal and the inspector's view on said policy. The inspector took the view that the policy should not apply to properties that are not small rural dwellings. It's undisputed that this existing dwelling is not a small rural dwelling. The report goes on to contradict the inspector's view, implies that the policy should not be applied to the extension of larger homes. However, it should be used. Oh yeah.
Thank you.
All right, no, that's it. So it should be used to restrict the size of replacement dwellings, which is kind of confusing, makes no sense. All right, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And can we note our appreciation of the speakers' attendance today and their contribution to this process. It's sort of called public platform, and it's always an integral part of our planning scrutiny. So thank you for committing your time and your efforts and your energy in terms of those contributions. And thank you more or less for keeping on time. Okay, which is appreciated. Just to remind everybody that members now, we're tasked to consider. You will have had the decision item in front of you. You will have had the guidance regarding this particular item, exclusion of the public, exempt personal information. And I'm assuming, therefore, members, that you will have looked at the information on this report, which draws our attention to the considerations that we have to make. And principally, one of them is, does the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweigh the public interest in disclosing the information? And if the answer is yes, then the public is excluded. And then we would then debate the confidential items. It is really important to point out that any discussions we have now about the principle of exclusion of the public and exempt items, we do not talk about any individual details because we are still in public at this stage. So if you want my steer on this, I do believe that we say yes to this question, and therefore, in my view, the public interest in maintaining the exemption does outweigh the public interest in disclosing the information. Now, that is just my view, but I wish now to get views from members and we can have the debate.
Councillor Evans earlier.
Councillor Evans, then Councillor.
On this particular question, Chair, I'm happy to go with your steer. I think it is important that wherever possible, that the public are involved in our decision making and it's fully transparent. But obviously, because of the specific nature of this application and the fact that several new members, including myself, are on the panel, that it would probably be prudent in this case to go with your steer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Army.
Thanks, Richard. The four speakers who quite clearly know the applicants, and some of them are representing the applicants, have named all of the family members, have described most of the medical ailments that they are suffering from, have done that in the public forum, which is obviously their choice to do that. And as this is a strange application where it will be weighted towards a number of non-planning issues in the debate, I can't see any reason for exemption now because the four of them have already made public or most of the issues. So I would say keep it public because this is an unusual application and let the people hear why we made the decision.
Other views, please. Councillor Collins.
Yes, Chair, I support Councillor Arnott in this. A report, well, when the minutes are published, any report could be redacted if there was sensitive information in there. As the speakers, so I know the applicants, I don't see any advantage in excluding the public. I notice Councillor Evans' remarks about there being new members on the committee. That is totally irrelevant. It's the public interest, not the interest of this committee. I'll support Councillor Arnott in this.
Thank you. Councillor Griffiths.
I also agree with Councillor Arnott. the people here are aware of what's going on, so I would support them staying.
Other views, please. Councillor Pittman and Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. I would prefer to be on the safe side and basically would support the exclusion of the public to maintain confidentiality.
Right. I mean, we will move to a vote in terms of how we decide, because it's not an individual decision, it's a collective decision that we make. And I think these are all important considerations that we're now debating. We take this very, very seriously. And like a lot of decisions, there is a balance there. But you've made some very valid points so far, members, so we take those on board. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Without actually knowing the full insight of what we're going to discuss, and the people who are sat in this room obviously know. So I'm just a bit bewildered as to why it needs to be an exempt item. I don't understand what's going to be so secret that it's going to be excluded. I'm just not getting it.
I want to bring Mark up.
Thank you, Chairman. I think as well as the members of the public are in the room, you have to bear in mind the fact that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the wider public if this item is not taken in public as a confidential item. So it's not just the people in the room; it's the wider debate that needs to be considered, and the access of the wider, the global population, because it will go on the internet, to that information. So that is the reason why it would be that. It's not just the fact that the physical presence; it's the presence of people being able to watch that online. We could not then, if this was not considered to be an exempt item, we could not then delete that part of the debate, because the decision of the committee would have been that all of this information is discussed in public. There was a discussion that I had with the applicant, and they indicated that they would want this information to be discussed in private.
That's fine.
That's why
when you put it in that context, it makes a huge difference. Thank you.
So I don't know if there's anything else that Mr. Curtis would want to add to that at all.
Not a huge amount, Chairman. The item is marked as being exempt information because one of the categories of exempt information is information about any individual. Clearly, there is information about individuals which is in your exempt report. That information in terms of GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, would be sensitive personal information, so that has a higher degree of sensitivity, obviously, and confidentiality than normal personal information. It is a matter for yourselves, of course, which is why you're having the debate, but that's the background to it. And as Mr. Evans has said, it's either in public or it's not in public. It can't be partially in public.
Thank you for that clarification. I just want to bring in Mark again, and then I'll go to the speakers. Do you wish to speak, Councillor? But not now, because I've got the list. We'll put you down on the list. Okay.
Just one final point of clarification, and that is that the exempt information, the personal information, is what's going to be discussed as an exempt element. The debate about how that is then applied to the application would still be made in public. Obviously, with all members being careful not to reveal the information that they've been presented confidentially. So in terms of the merits of the application, that element of it will be discussed in public. It's just the presentation of the personal information and its implications for the later discussion will be, let's say, in public. Thank you, Chairman.
Vice Chair.
Thank
Thank you.
The next speaker I had was
Councillor
Collins coming back in again.
Councillor Collins returning. Councillor Armitt then, and then Councillor Farrington.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for that. In light of the comments, I second your recommendation that the public are exempted, or excluded, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. And Councillor Armitt and Councillor Farrington.
Just very quickly, the comment from Mark on what he'd been told by the applicant, if that could have been in the paper or if that could have been up front, we wouldn't have had this discussion then because we'd have known from the start. From Mr. Curtis's point of view, is it in our gift to have the public in the room and not on the internet, or is it all in or all out?
Chairman, it would not be normal to have a public meeting restricted, a meeting which is normally available to the public by not by streaming but by recorded version of the meeting being on the internet, partially available. Even if we went down that road, we would be susceptible to freedom of information requests for the remaining information, the remaining part of the meeting which wasn't put on the internet. We would be having to go down the road of destroying the part of the tape which covers the confidential personal information. I think that wouldn't be a good look in response to an FOI request for part of the recording of a public meeting to say, sorry, we've destroyed it so you can't see it and have it.
Councillor Farrington.
Yeah, I think to some degree I would hope it's become a non-debate because in view of the disclosure that this would be broadcast globally, I think when you take into account vulnerabilities and personal security and the desire of the family, I'd certainly not want to have this as a public session. Thank you.
I'm going to move to the vote on this. So my steer is obviously that, you know, this is a publicly exempt item and we exclude the public on this because I think there is great sensitivity around some of these issues. And whilst, okay, people have made the point that certain things have been said by speakers, certain things can come out when we're discussing this particular item as well, of a personal nature, medical information, etc. So, and I think that would be regrettable to share that with the wider public. So I'm going to ask all those in favour of excluding the public at this stage. Would you indicate?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
I think that's unanimous. Thank you for that. At this stage, with great respect, I ask that all the public be escorted into a public area, please, and you will be brought back. You can have a comfort break, yes, certainly. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, members of the public. I hope that wasn't too uncomfortable for you. Okay. I'm going to ask Mark to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. So obviously everyone's back in. So just a policy context, there's two key policies here, GD4, which despite the photograph, aerial photograph I showed earlier showing this as being sort of a suburban area, is part of the countryside. And then policy H7 relates to extensions and replacement dwellings, and that's got two elements to it. The scale, which normally looks at a 33% increase on the footprint. This is a 4-bedroom property, so it's already a larger property. So that has a less of an issue. However, the appeal decisions that have previously been looked at have looked at extensions rather than replacement dwellings, so it's a slightly different issue there. Second issue is the design. It's the edge of the built-up area. It's where the character is changing from suburban to rural. So that's the aerial photograph again, and you see there's a number of sort of green sort of slices through the through that area, so that the more urban area and the built-up frontage here is becoming less built up as you come down this way to the larger gap between here and Wyre and the Skippool, beyond Skippool. And then finally, there's part of the reason is the impact on the neighbouring property. So again, there was that issue with the garage filling that gap. So the outrigger is larger than that garage, filling that gap to the rear. So looking at the specific needs of the applicant, they probably do justify a larger property, but the officer recommendation is that the increase in floor space is greater than can be justified. The percentage-wise, just in terms of that point that was raised earlier, if you take the existing floor area, multiply that by 3.3 to give you 330%, that does come to, when you include the garden room, does come to that figure. But I say you've got the actual, irrespective of the percentage, you've got the floor areas and the report. So again, some elements of the design were considered to go beyond just the testaments set out. Full width of the plot, as I was saying, was an issue. So on balance, the application was recommended for refusal, or taking all those matters into consideration, as set out on page 53 of the agenda. And that concludes my presentation, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Now it's open to debate and thoughts regarding the specific application. For the members of the public, we've just had a very comprehensive discussion regarding the exempt item and the related matters within that. But now we're moving on to the specific application and having that, as we pointed out right at the beginning of the meeting, that open debate with you obviously present as well. So, Councillor Evans, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the officers for a comprehensive report. I think here we've got to mar the two sides of the policies that are in place and then look at the specific circumstances around this application. And I'm, on the evidence that we've reviewed, I'm happy to support this application in its entirety. I think we've got to think of the needs, the care needs of the individuals, while also taking into account the requirement for a family life and the privacy of the family members and their needs in the future. I think the local people have not objected. I don't think there's any objections from the parish and the various bodies. And on that basis, I'm more than happy to support this application. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to go against the officer's recommendation and to support my learned friend and actually second this. I think that where the house is located in a large plot, once built, it still is not substantial within that plot. I think it is in line with a lot of other large houses around that area. I think it is next to an area of scarring to the countryside that has been done by the road development, so therefore it's hard to say that it makes much damage to the countryside compared to what's been done all around it for the last few years. I think from the family's point of view, with their needs and their requirements, this is an excellent house in terms of allowing them to have the life and the quality of life that they can obtain. So I'm very, very happy to second this.
Normally, in normal circumstances, if there is a proposer and a seconder for a move against officer's recommendation, we would adjourn. But in these circumstances, I think I would like to give other people, briefly, a chance to contribute to the debate, and then we'll see where we are. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, Chair, I'm really glad the officers have brought this to us. I understand the reasons for refusal because it does go against certain policies, but I think they brought it to us to make a measured response to that. I'm more than happy to support the building of this property as well, and I think it could be an exemplar proposal of how to build a house for people with disabilities. And no matter what we say the measures are, what they need now, these people have got degenerative conditions. Perfect.
Dixon. Other contributors. Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. The visual impact of this is from the view from the west across Alton countryside to this. Now, we've heard in the report that the development will take up most of the width of the site. Is there adequate room for screening? With it being open countryside, I'm assuming there won't be any development to the west of the property. It's visible for anybody travelling east. And given the size of the development, are the officers confident that adequate screening can be provided by condition?
Well, let's see what the officers say.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I think you're talking about the view sort of coming from this direction along here. So you've got Old Maze Lane that sort of swings around. It joined this, the old part sort of goes back north down towards the wire. This is the main line of the road, and on this plan it just sort of swings off. If I go back a bit, sorry, not this way. That one there. So you can see the line of Old Mains Lane that's been, I think it's been diverted round there, hasn't it, as a result of this work here. So you've got the road coming round. The borough boundary, I think, is on the line of the river there. So as the road comes around and faces that way, I suppose there's a limited amount of space, but I suppose it could be done with something like a hedgerow planting or something like that along that boundary. You're not going to get putting anything large in terms of large growing trees to try and soften the impact there. You're not going to get those in that space. You'd be planting them too close to the dwelling. It just would create future problems. So I'd imagine something like a wall with a hedgerow planting to soften it would be the boundary treatment there.
Thank you. Are there any other contributors? One thing I would say is that normally with an adjournment where there's a recommendation to go against officer's refusal, officer's recommendation, then obviously one of the reasons we have that adjournment is to explore reasons, you know, to go with that judgment. And what I'm going to do at this stage is ask Mark if he could share with us some potential reasons for approving the application rather than going with officer's recommendation to refuse.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. Yeah, so obviously the usual situation when we're discussing this type of thing is where officers have recommended approval and the committee are refusing it, so the reasons for refusal are set out. So you'll be well aware of that position. However, in this circumstance, because there's a report that comes to a conclusion that the application should be refused, you need to be able to demonstrate that, you know, why the decision has gone contrary to that recommendation. So you need to put a reason for refusal, a reason for approval forward. So clearly, in this circumstance, it's been discussed. The personal circumstances of the applicant have been the key, and the family have been the key issue there. So a reason for approval would be something along the lines of the committee have taken account of the adaptations considered necessary to address the special requirements of the applicant and her family, and concluded that these represent material considerations that would justify the approval of a dwelling larger than would ordinarily be approved in line with policy H7 of the Fylde Local Plan to 2032, incorporating partial review, which have been justified by the applicant. So, which has been justified by the applicant. So that's the reason for approval. What you're saying there is that there are very special circumstances here, effectively, as to why that decision should be made. Obviously, if we are approving an application of this nature, it should be subject to a number of conditions as well. So obviously, the committee need to address conditions. So the type of thing that would need to be considered as both standard in regard to any dwelling that we allow and in regard to the particular conditions that have been required or requested by statutory consultees, they would deal with a time limit for the implementation of development, as we put on all applications, that the development is carried out in accordance with the approved plans, the materials of the building to be agreed, a condition about the soft landscaping and one about the hard landscaping, and that hard landscaping one would have to include the sort of permeable materials to be used on the driveway to address surface water runoff. As has just been mentioned, a boundary treatment detail to ensure that the boundary is a good balance between the needs of the applicant and the impact on the more rural area character of that area. Making sure that that garage is retained as a garage, not used for other purposes and available for parking. Given that this is an extension, this is already quite a sizable extension or replacement above that percentage to withdraw permitted development rights for future extensions. a condition about tree protection, in particular these trees towards the rear, to protect them during the construction. There's a request for a biodiversity enhancement plan that's come from the that's really related to bats, which has come from our ecology advisors. And then finally a construction management plan. One of the requests from the Highway Authority is to have vehicles parked off the road during construction. So that would deal with that as part of that. United, in terms of, that's the conditions. In terms of informative notes, so this is just advice. We've got two requests there. One is from United Utilities that the drainage of the property follows the surface water hierarchy, and that's set out in our supplementary planning document on flooding that was recently approved and adopted. And the second one is from Greater Manchester Ecology Unit regarding observation of the Wildlife and Countryside Act and Conservation of Habitats and Species regulations, which relates primarily to, again, whilst the surveys have demonstrated there's little chance of there being any bats in the roof, you might always find them because they don't read the same guidance as we do, and therefore they might be there. So just a note to say, keep that in mind during the demolition element of this phase. I think that would cover it. Those would obviously need to be worked up into full conditions. So what I would suggest is a way forward there is that if the committee is so minded that rather than approving the application here and now, the authority to approve the scheme is delegated to myself, subject to working these conditions up on to cover those matters that I've just mentioned. Thank you, Chairman.
We would still have to vote that we agree that would be the way forward.
Yes. Sorry, Chairman. There'll be the reason for approval and then the conditions.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you, Mr. Evans. And I'm happy to propose on the basis of those conditions being worked up. So I'm happy to stand by my previous decision.
And I'll retain my second.
So do we understand what we're voting for now? We're delegating authority to approve, and we can work up those conditions, etc. And of course, this is contrary to the officer's recommendation. That now is the vote that we're going to have. So if you're in favour, all those in favour of what has just been suggested, would you please raise your hand?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
To thank, first of all, the officers for their work, and not just for this specific application, which was detailed and balanced and gave us the information we needed on which to make those judgments, but also for their work during the past 12 months and for the service to Fylde Council. I'd like to thank all the officers at Fylde for their work with the authority in planning and elsewhere, and we recognise the dedication and expertise that we have available, and we're very, very grateful as a committee for the support, guidance and leadership that we receive. And the decision today is not intended to be disrespectful in any way. It's simply looking at the evidence and coming to a judgment, and I hope we can agree on that. Could I thank members for their diligence and their dedication and their service over the past 12 months as well, particularly as this is a new committee from May, and I want to applaud all the new members. I think your dedication and your understanding and your willingness to learn and listen as well as to speak is an essential quality that you've demonstrated, and I think it's been super. And I would like to thank members of the public who have been present today, and I hope you can understand the lengths that we have gone to today to look at this particular application and to come to the decision we have. and the protocol and the process that I explained right at the beginning of why that was necessary to do it in the way that we did. And so it only remains for me to say to everybody in the room, a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year. And I hope you have a really enjoyable time. Thank you for your presence today, and thank you for coming. Thank you.